You don't need to be a geography student to know that the Earth has two poles, one in the south and another in the north, Antarctica and the Arctic. But what do you really know about these places, aside from the fact that they are the coldest spots on the planet? Here are some hints. One of them, Antarctica, has a vast amount of land beneath its frozen water and a considerable extent. On the other hand, the Arctic is not considered a continent, but rather an island made mostly of frozen waters or minimal land areas, which are actually made of ice or a thin layer of soil. There, you can find a specific type of vegetation, tundra. In short, the Arctic is a frozen landmark. There is almost no land beneath it. Antarctica, however, is a continent covered in ice. Given this, the consequences of the planet's rising temperatures have different effects on each region, especially since the Arctic Sea region has connections with other countries and greater access to explore, where it is estimated there is much interesting stuff to discover. According to the United States Geological Survey, the Arctic may hold about 30% of the undiscovered gas reserves and 13% of the oil reserves. If you keep up with world news, you might have seen that Norway is the country most involved in oil exploration in the Arctic. In 2018, the country granted 11 licenses for fossil fuel and gas exploration to companies operating especially in that region. It seems like a promising market that many are keeping an eye on. To sum it up, the major issue here is that the Arctic ecosystem is very sensitive to pollutants, and an oil spill would be catastrophic. Still, this risk does not prevent various actions of this kind from taking place. It's worth noting that polar ice caps are crucial for maintaining the Earth's balance, which requires care for those who venture to extract anything from there. Additionally, the living beings in the region have an immense ability to survive in extreme climates and do not inhabit any other places on Earth. But here's a fact you might not know, which starts to differentiate the two poles. Legally, it is allowed, under certain conditions, to explore the Arctic. However, no one has permission to explore Antarctica. Now, let me explain this. When you look at a world map and see a thick layer of ice representing the poles of the Earth, it can chill your heart. The first thing you need to know is that the Arctic is a region where the average temperature of the warmest month is below 10 degrees Celsius. According to history, at the North Pole, also known as the Arctic, there have been people living in that region since 300 BC. Even with those temperatures, there was a community. But what does this have to do with Antarctica? Both are extreme poles, meaning they are on completely opposite sides of the planet. However, the Arctic developed much closer to the European continent, which facilitated access and settlement, albeit sparse. In contrast, Antarctica, due to its extremely lower temperatures, which range around -30 degrees to -65 degrees Celsius, has almost no human presence. Moreover, Antarctica is the coldest continent on Earth and is farther away from other regions. It remains frozen almost entirely throughout the year. Despite having seawater and ice covering its entire surface, Antarctica is considered a desert. The Antarctic Treaty represents about 10% of the Earth's surface. It's no surprise that climate changes in the continent and the Antarctic Ocean can significantly affect the rest of the planet. And even though it is the coldest, highest, and windiest continent on Earth, we also know it is rich in marine and terrestrial resources, such as diamonds, gold, and oil, as well as abundant marine life, like whales, which were heavily hunted in the 19th and 20th centuries. Now, you can see some similarities between the Arctic and Antarctica, right? After World War II, information about these regions began to spread, and as expected in a post-war climate, tensions regarding the region increased. To resolve this and many other issues, the world's major powers decided that the continent should belong to everyone. Thus, the Antarctic Treaty was created. It states that the Antarctic continent should be an area exclusively for science and peace, free from military interventions, directed towards research and conservation of its space. The idea behind this document was to ensure that it remained a region for all humanity. That's why no one is allowed to explore Antarctica. Following this treaty, significant environmental measures were established, such as conventions on the protection of local fauna and flora, the establishment of a Commission for the Preservation of Living Marine Resources, and more recently, the Commission for Environmental Protection. Contrary to what one might think, events related to Antarctica are much more frequent than one might imagine. Meetings regarding the Antarctic Treaty take place every year. During these meetings, all points associated with the treaty are re-evaluated. The main goal of the meetings is to reaffirm the dedication and commitment of the countries involved to preserving Antarctica as a natural reserve and to its importance in international cooperation. Generally, the topics discussed during these meetings focus on the consequences that climate changes in the region may have worldwide, in addition to promoting scientific investigation and consolidating the culture of international collaboration. According to Decree 75.000963 of July 11, 1975, it recognizes the interest of all humanity in ensuring that Antarctica remains exclusively for peaceful purposes and does not become a scene or object of international discord. Acknowledging the significant contributions of scientific knowledge gained through international collaboration in the scientific research conducted in Antarctica, as Antarctica is not divided into countries. The primary challenge for settlement in the region results from extreme conditions and attitudes, which make understanding the incredible phenomena of the Antarctic winter, when the continent experiences complete darkness and extreme cold for 6 months, and the Antarctic summer, when the continent remains in full daylight with less severe weather during the other 6 months, difficult. In addition to the extreme, desert-like, and hazardous cold, one can imagine that no one wants to spend 6 months in complete darkness, especially in such a place. Another factor complicating the settlement of the continent is the absence of political borders and nearby countries. Although there are areas that are indeed the responsibility of certain countries, this regionalization was created based on physical criteria, dividing Antarctica into West Antarctica, the smaller area, and East Antarctica, the larger and more resistant one to the melting of polar ice caps. Just like everyone suffers from climate issues, Antarctica is not exempt, particularly the western region. Atmospheric pollution is the primary cause of global warming and the hole in the ozone layer, which are responsible for the melting of polar ice caps, leading to rising sea levels and causing significant problems in other continents, especially in Oceania, a domino effect causing a true avalanche of issues. Therefore, to study environmental problems and many other related topics concerning the least populated continent in the world, various countries reached consensus and signed the Antarctic Treaty, in which they concluded that the continent would remain intact for peaceful research purposes. That's why so many countries have scientific bases in the South Pole. Antarctica is an isolated region that can only be studied for a period of 6 months each year during the Antarctic summer. For the other half of the year, the region is engulfed in complete darkness and becomes extremely colder. Despite being a relatively unknown area, we now know there is a significant possibility of it being rich in precious stones and oil, as well as in marine fauna. However, extreme conditions, geographic distances, and even political issues make the agreement among the countries established to preserve Antarctica make complete sense. So, why are the conditions in the Arctic so different? First, it's essential to understand that, despite exploration in the Arctic being allowed, the region suffers just as much as Antarctica. Its ecosystem, sensitive to minor environmental changes, is extremely concerning and relevant. However, just like settlement, resource exploitation, and territorial claims had already begun a long time ago. As we mentioned, there have been people living there for centuries before Christ. The region still generates disputes among various nations, such as Sweden, the United States, and even Russia, which occupies about half of the region and has been investing in its unusual project called Iceberg. So, that news we mentioned at the beginning of the video is quite concerning, not just because it's in the North Pole, but to what extent have we come before it's too late? If it's not already. To close this video, I leave you with a little reminder. Despite its abundance of natural and precious resources, Antarctica is a place where no one can exploit its moral resources due to the agreement created in 1959 and signed by various countries throughout the history of humanity. To this day, the Antarctic Treaty stands. This means that if there is one place on Earth where peace is mandatory, it is called Antarctica. In contrast, the Arctic frequently makes headlines, being a topic of disputes and interests. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave your comments on the topic, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you next time.